So this may come as a surprise to a lot of you. I know it was for me. I am discovering when I'm having conversations with planty people, whether they're newer to plant collecting or they have a huge plant collection and have been collecting for years, a lot of people are staying away from succulents because they have trouble keeping them alive. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a conversation with someone and they tell me about how they love this type of plant and this type of plant. You know, they're showing me their awesome collection, and then they say, but I stay away from succulents because for some reason I can't keep those alive. Is this a plant community secret that I'm coming across? Because succulents have such a reputation, right, for being so easy care, just easy, you know, you can put them anywhere and they'll live forever. I don't know. I think some of us are out here struggling. I know I was for a long time. But fear not, in this episode, I'm going to share 10 mistakes you could be making that are killing your succulents, how to avoid those mistakes, and what to do to make sure that your succulents are thriving and growing, because there are so many beautiful varieties of these plants. You can usually find them at a good rate at your local big box shop. That's where I am today to kind of explore what succulents they have. You can sometimes find like rare and uncommon ones mixed in. So we really shouldn't be afraid of these plants, everybody. Like, let's embrace these beautiful succulents and have fun adding them to our collection. So let's jump into it and talk about the first mistake that many of us are making when it comes to caring for these succulents. This Houseplant Care 101 series is sponsored by rePotme.com. With rePotme, you can have all of your houseplant supplies delivered right to your door. They are a one-stop shop for all of your houseplant, orchid, or succulent needs. They have custom handmade houseplant soils ranging from tropical houseplants, cactus and succulents, pothos, snake plants, and more. I cannot live without their clear slotted orchid pots. They have amazing houseplant fertilizers and so much more. I've included their link in my description below, and you can get 10% off any soil with my code Ashley. So first up, I have to mention light. Many of these succulents are sold as low light plants, and they are so not low light plants. They won't die in lower light necessarily, but if they have really low light, they're going to really struggle if anything else is out of whack. Like if they don't have the correct soil, the correct watering, if their leaves get covered in dust, I mean, you name it. I could go on and on. They're more susceptible to pests because they won't be as healthy. So putting your plant in a lower light area, even if it's considered a lower light plant, which succulents aren't, they will not thrive. And that's a big mistake that many of us are making when it comes to succulents. So what's the solution? How do we avoid this? We'll put them in a higher light area. Now, I do recommend avoiding direct beating down sunlight because these plants will sunburn. If you're seeing that the leaves are really fading or looking extra crispy or just not quite right, you might want to make sure that they're away from the window at least a little bit, or they're not getting super bright midday light. But these plants in general adore sun. So the next mistake I see all the time, and that's having your succulent in a pot that is way too large. These succulents have very delicate small root systems a lot of times, and they enjoy being a bit more snug in their pot, really because it helps prevent root rot. These succulents sitting in these really big pots means that there's soil kind of all around their roots, and then what happens is that soil, when we water it, becomes really saturated, and there's nowhere for that moisture to go. Those roots cannot absorb that water enough, so what happens is that plant just becomes suffocated, gets root rot, and a lot of times dies. So how do we fix this? Very simple. You just put it in a smaller pot, make sure that that succulent has a little bit of room for those roots, but not too much that it's going to become waterlogged and develop root rot. Another mistake that I see pretty regularly is not practicing pest management on these succulents. For some reason, we think succulents are just like totally invincible. We can bring them home, throw them on the shelf, and they're done. You know, okay, I don't have to do anything for this plant. But they are really susceptible to pests, just like all of these other plants that we bring home. Specifically, I see a lot of spider mites and mealybugs and scale. You know, they are susceptible. So, very simple, the things you can do. When you bring it home, wash off those leaves and it'll get rid of like any eggs or pests that you didn't see at the store, because always check at the store. That's rule number one, right? And the other thing you can do is maybe spray it down with some neem or some insecticidal soap. You could also put some systemic granules in there. You could use beneficial insects, whatever you usually do for your pest prevention.
include your succulents in there, because I think that's one of the things that we don't talk about much, is how these plants are actually pretty susceptible to pests. Next up is using the right soil. I can't tell you the number of times that we just bring a succulent home and it's fine. We just leave it with whatever it was potted up with at the store, and we wonder why it becomes waterlogged and just dies. It's because the soil's not well draining enough. So you can make your own soil recipe. You could incorporate whatever potting mix you have at home, either perlite or pumice, just something really gritty, sand even, just to make sure that soil is very well draining. You could also use a customized soil. As you all know, I love the rePotme soils. I'll be using the cactus and succulent soils on all of my succulents moving forward because their soil is perfect for succulents and cactus, and I know that the investment that I make in the soil is going to pay off in spades because I won't have to worry about root rot on my cactus and my succulents. So you could go either way, whether you make your own or buy customized. Just make sure that it's well draining for those succulents. Otherwise, the soil is going to retain too much moisture. Now you have it in a really good, well draining soil, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to water it once and leave it on the shelf and not water it again. No, these succulents need water. This is a mistake that I've made myself. I'm like so afraid of overwatering my plant that I give it the well-draining soil, I have it in the correct pot, and then my plant is like thirsting for water. So as a general rule, when it comes to watering, just make sure the soil dries out and then give it a good drink. And a way to tell if you're not quite sure is that these succulents do absorb a lot of water and hold the water in their leaves. So when those leaves become a little bit thinner or kind of puckered looking, that means it's ready to rehydrate and you can give that plant a good drink. And the next mistake you might be making is in how you are watering your plant. If you're just dousing it from the top and you're just on like a regular weekly schedule, you're not really taking your time with these plants, it could be causing an issue. So I wouldn't say this is necessarily a mistake that's going to kill your plant if you're watering it from the top, because I water a lot of my succulents from the top. But you could do some bottom watering techniques on your plant, which is a really great way to guarantee that your succulent is going to absorb only the water that it needs. So it just gives us a little bit of kind of breathing room when watering our plants, that it's absorbed the right amount of moisture in the soil. So bottom watering is super simple. You just put some water in a little vessel and then put your succulent into the vessel, allow it to soak up moisture, and then when you've noticed that it's not really absorbing any more water, at that point, you just take it out, and you should notice that the pot is a little bit heavier because it's absorbed moisture. Now, if that soil isn't absorbing any moisture, then you have a bit of a problem. You do want that soil to be retaining at least some moisture for that plant. Another one is airflow around these succulents. So, from what I've read, succulents are not necessarily used to high humidity climates. Now, it does depend on the variety that you have, so don't hold me to that, but a lot of these succulents are used to more arid, dry climates. So if they're stuck in an area with very high humidity, they can be prone to getting fungus on their leaves. So if you do happen to have your succulents in a high humidity environment, maybe you have a humidifier going for some of your really leafy philodendrons or something, or you live in an area that's really high humidity like Florida, maybe give those succulents a bit more airflow. So have a fan going, and it will help prevent fungus from developing on those leaves and bacteria. It will also help keep the soil from developing fungus and bacteria. So another mistake that I see happen is that people will plant succulents in these shallow succulent dishes, but it doesn't have any drainage. A lot of times they'll bring a succulent home from the store and it's in not a pot with only no drainage, but it's just the pot itself prevents any evaporation from happening in the soil. So the succulents can die off pretty quickly if you give them one too many, good waterings. So here's a way to avoid that problem, is just to make sure you're using a pot that does have great drainage. And if you want to use a cute, something else like a different type of pot that maybe doesn't have drainage, you can use it as a cover pot. That's what I do with a lot of my plants. Is I have my nursery pot. I love the clear slotted orchid pots from rePotme. You can use whatever kinds of nursery pots you like, but I like using those and then having a cover pot on the outside so I can kind of like mix it up and switch out cover pots, but I don't have to repot that plant every time I want to use a different cover pot. You could also use terracotta. Anything that's porous is going to absorb up any extra moisture, kind of wick away that extra moisture. Just make sure there's drainage holes on the bottom. And I know it feels like common sense, but I have seen that happen all the time where the pot is just not quite right. So that's an easy mistake to avoid. Now, sometimes the succulent survives, but it gets really leggy and ugly, and we just don't really want that succulent anymore, and there's such an easy fix for that, and that's really just pruning that plant down. So if it becomes really leggy, first up, that means that it's not getting enough light usually, so you'll want to up your light, which will help that plant to, you know, stay bushier and for the leaves to get larger and that type of thing. But to prevent the legginess and kind of start over, just prune it. You can just kind of like use shears or even your finger, prune that plant down, and then you can propagate using whatever you trimmed off of your plant. You can just take those little leaves, push them into the soil, and over time they should create new plants. And this pruning method can be used on a lot of plants, but it's really, really terrific on succulents to help prevent and discourage that legginess that happens. Incorrect fertilizing is a very easy mistake to make when it comes to succulents. You're either in one of two boats. You're super enthusiastic, you really want this to work out with this new succulent that you got. Maybe you killed a succulent in the past, you're like, all right, this time I'm ready, I'm gonna fertilize this bad boy. So you get your fertilizer, you fertilize that plant, you're all gung-ho, and boom, that plant dies. Or you're on the complete other side where you're like, I'm not touching fertilizer, I don't know what to do, it makes me nervous to even think about fertilizing this plant. So succulents do appreciate some fertilizing during the growing months, so usually in the summer and the spring months when we come into the growing season. However, they don't need a lot of fertilizing, so I would actually stay away from your typical houseplant fertilizer for succulents, and I would stick with one that says it's for cacti and succulents. You can't go wrong with that. And start at 50% strength, kind of ease into it, see how your plant does, and then if it seems to be responding well, you can go at maybe the full strength of that specific for succulent and cactus fertilizer mixture to really make sure that that succulent thrives, and it'll thank you for it. I mean, they do need to be fertilized. They're limited to the nutrients in the pot. So it's an easy mistake to make, but it's also a really easy one to avoid. So I hope this episode was helpful for all of you. We no longer need to be afraid of adding beautiful succulents to our collection because they really are that. They are so gorgeous and stunning and deserve a place amongst our collection. Now, if you have any additional tips, don't hesitate, leave them in the comments below. I love hearing your feedback, and all of you are so knowledgeable and know so much about plants that I am constantly learning, and appreciate all of you in the plant community. Now, if you'd like to see future care videos, definitely subscribe so episodes will show up in your newsfeed, and we also have a wonderful community on Instagram if you'd like to follow us there. And lastly, huge thank you again to rePotme. You all know I'm absolutely obsessed with their plant care products. I've linked everything I mentioned in this episode in my description below for you.
So definitely check them out, and you can use code Ashley for 10% off any of their wonderful houseplant soils.
All right, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. You'll definitely be seeing me soon. Bye.